Hello everybody. Good morning and hello. This is Wild Rocket here with you from Saitama Prefecture, Kazo City, Japan in the Kanto region. And today I'm going to give you a rundown of my time in Japan over these past 11 months. I have about 4 weeks, just under 4 weeks left here in Japan before I'm due to leave. So I thought it would be very useful and fun and interesting to record some of my impressions and how I've sort of developed in that time. It's been an amazing, and it continues to be an amazing journey, because of course it's, even though we've reached the end of this particular episode, the process is still on. The process is nevertheless going to be still ongoing until the end, and because of the powerful nature of someone who travels and realizes that basically the way you see the world, the way you see a country or a people or a society, is a reflection of what's going on in your heart and in your mind at the time. Japan and the lessons I learnt here and the process of development, which uh, particular process of development which was initiated when I came here, will still continue and will continue to be a major part of my life going forward. So it's an ongoing thing, and there's no real beginning or end. But having said that, it's also inevitable that I've come to very close to a major milestone in many ways, seeing as I will be leaving one country where one language is spoken, where one culture is in play, back to another country where different language is spoken and the different culture is in play. And my lifestyle will be different. I'll be spending time doing different things every day. Since I came here, almost all of my time has been devoted to one occupation and one work and one job. That's about to end now, so anything I do going forward is going to be radically different. I'm going to be spending my time in a different way. I'll have different friends. I'll wake up with a different energy. I'll spend the hours of my time doing something completely different to what I was doing, to what I have been doing for the past 11 months, and what I will be doing for the next 3 to 4 weeks. It's very difficult to know where to begin, really. I think when I came here to Japan, I was so excited. And I still am very excited. That feeling hasn't dwindled. It's only matured and grown more intense. But I was so excited when I came here, and I really wanted to. I'd loved Japanese films as a child. I'd loved comics from Japan. I was really inspired by them. Growing up as a young man in Syria, in England, watching all these cartoons which were dubbed in English and Arabic, and kind of just really being inspired by them, learning to see, my generation and and sort of my capacity for imagination as a young being to be so influenced by this really exciting medium of expression, of animation and of and of of animation and of the really exciting human storylines which were often expressed in animation during those days. It was a very exciting thing seeing all these different media coming out of Japan, and it really kind of made a young man or a young boy really daydream about how this faraway land must be like. Is it as it's depicted in the anime? Is it this fun, playful, exciting land where anything goes? So, all these things kind of stoke your imagination. The same is true with the comics, the same is true with my uncle's documentary, which I watched quite early on in my youth, in which I saw survivors of Hiroshima speak, a city I've been very privileged to have visited, in which I saw sort of Tokyo in all its kind of neon, colourful, multi-themed splendor. all these things are really inspiring, you know, and they really kind of stoke your imagination as to what a place must be like. And then growing up, as I got older and older, I would dream about coming to somewhere like Japan, but it's not something I made a real effort to materialize until a year ago, exactly a year ago, in fact. And once I did, I was really driven by my vision, and I also at that time I'd had, you know, I had my spiritual awakening, so I'd begun to see that a lot of the structures and belief systems and ways of living which many people adopt may or may not be true, and that there's a wider layer of humanity and a wider layer of consciousness beneath us. So I knew full well, intellectually and even in my heart to some extent, that if I'm going to do this, I have to be prepared for something big, which is to throw all my expectations out of the window. Because the place I will be visiting, the challenges I will be experiencing, and the things I will learn about this language and culture will be completely different to any previous daydream I may have had about what it must be like, or any previous imagination of what it must be like. So I was very prepared to have to do that, and I tried to do that as best as I could. But of course, when you still come here, you're still influenced by who you are and how you've developed to that point. So once I came here to Japan, I realized it was more complex, more wonderful, more beautiful than I'd ever known and realized, and I begun to really experience Japan not as like uh, not an artistic source of inspiration, uh, not just solely as an artistic source of inspiration, but also as a living, breathing society in which people work, they play, they eat, you know, they take out the trash, they pay their bills, they solve problems, they wake up at a certain time, they shower at a certain time, you know, they call people for help. Learning all of this has been really fun, especially in a language which you cannot speak very well. That's been really, really exciting and really fun, and also very challenging. You know, it's been very challenging, not so much in a very not so much in a heavy way. You know, I've been very fortunate that as challenges have come, I've had many tools, many psychological inner work tools, and many little kind of life hacks which I'd already brought with me to use, and I've really had a good sense of how to best tune into my heart space so that I can see whatever challenge that comes up into my life from a wider perspective. And even when I came to Japan, I had a lot of those tools, so I've been very fortunate to be in this unique situation in which I can really step up to the plate and embrace challenges from a wholesome kind of way. Now, what else can I say? It's been very challenging and very difficult because I think for the first maybe 8 to 9 months, I had this huge enthusiasm for learning Japanese. I would wake up every day learning Japanese and spending time watching anime and like working through workbooks and things. And there was even like 2 months in which I didn't have internet, and I deliberately did not try to do anything about it because I was so happy with this new space to go out into Japan. This was right around Golden Week, going out into to Japan without making maps, you know, just taking risks, just jumping out into it, you know, and making the best of it, and not being so caught up in what could go wrong or having to have directions or calling people. That was really fun and really exciting. But I think from about late May onwards, I began to have another really great epiphany, because I began to really, really pay attention in a much deeper way, not just to people's reaction of me, but also of how I felt I was functioning in this environment. And it's been a very difficult answer to come to terms with, because, you know, I suppose I thought that I could just live out sort of my childhood dreams without taking into account the many ways I've developed as a person since then, in terms of changing my outlook on the world, you know, embracing more inner work techniques, meditative techniques, um, diet techniques, in terms of diet, in terms of healthy eating and eating more plant-based foods, and learning to do and realizing that all of these were such a major part of me, as well as the enthusiasm for working and living in a new environment and having this childlike joy of discovering how people live and eat and work here. That's been really fun, but at the same time, I had to contend with this new awakening that I had in September of 2013, almost 2 years ago now. And I had to contend with this new consciousness that I had, and I had to contend with the fact that, I'm not coming here as the old Bashir or the old Wild, or the person who existed before Wild Rocket. I'm coming here as this new spiritual being, and I have to be aware that ultimately I have a duty to live up to my heart's truth and my heart's expectation. And as fun as working in a school is, as fun as teaching English is, as fun as having this commitment and learning these responsibilities are, as much as I'm so thankful I threw myself into this situation, I know now, after the new psychological and health problems I've developed after working full time, that this can't continue. And not I don't mean living in Japan, but this sort of lifestyle. So even I'm very glad that I'm leaving. I'm really glad that my work contract is ending, because there is no way I can't imagine all the things I want to do in terms of spreading messages of love and compassion and healing, and participating in more artistic endeavors with people of my generation, and expressing art collaboratively, which is another huge interest, which is not just an interest, but one of my main life purposes, along with sharing videos like these. There's absolutely 0% chance that I can do any of these things in my capacity. And that's a big reality that I had to contend with, because having to embrace this reality means having to live a lie. It means knowing I have to go to work, go into a job every day, which I may enjoy, but I know deep down is not where I really should be in the long term. So that's been probably the single biggest challenge, learning to embrace who I am and realize that what I'm doing right now cannot continue beyond the time in which I agreed that it should continue. So this has been probably the biggest thing for me. And that's one of the more deeper things. And I'm really glad that I had the chance to air this out. Let me go through now some of the more light-hearted things. Let me kind of try to change the pace a bit. Japanese society, how have I found it? When I came, I spoke about how nice and polite people are, and how courteous and how well organized the society was. One thing I think that's continued to develop. The people here are really wonderful and nice and courteous and generous. I've also really begun to notice that Japan as a society, at least what I know to be, and at least based on what I know about Western society, and then also what I know about Arab society, Japan's quite different. It's not really a kind of society like the West, in which people are more separated from one another, but there are still strong structures of society in which people support one another and interact. There is that, and also in the West, in America and the UK, you have a very big art scene, and you have a functioning economy. But I think what sets Japan apart is that the work ethic is phenomenal in terms of the length of the time that people work here. And not just that, but even I think it extends into a kind of cultural mindset here, I suppose, that anything they put their minds to, whether it's something as mundane as working in an office, filling out accounts, or something as exciting as creative as making an anime, everything, there is a phenomenal attention to detail here. Like, you see that in everything. You see that in the way people maintain their gardens here, in the way streets are organized, in the way there's like 50,000 different anime series a year, and each one has a completely different story and theme, and each one has like a completely different set of characters and personalities, and the way that movies and anime and comics span every single genre here. There's so much output in a Japanese society because the cultural mindset encourages people to step into the radical action. And everything I'm saying here, by the way, is meant to be the most complimentary thing I could say about Japan. None of it is a criticism at all. Even though, of course, you can also look at things like work ethic as something which can be long working hours as something which can be detrimental to people's health. But I think that's another video entirely. Purely in terms of like a naive foreigner's perspective who knew nothing about Japan society coming in and still has a very beginner and novice impression of Japan. I would say that's really remarkable and I think really inspiring for me. I think there are parallels. There's no parallel in the UK or USA to how this cultural mindset here of devoting yourself absolutely to something and really working at it. There's no real equivalent. I've not seen. I just don't get that same sense in terms of writers and authors and painters and illustrators and artists and TV musicians producing the same kind of dedicating to themselves in the same way in the UK and USA, even though it does happen in pockets and it does happen amazingly when it does happen. I think Japan also, you have to remember that Japan is a very densely populated area. For many centuries it was cut off from influence from other societies, so they've learned to develop a very collaborative way of functioning in this society, which is very remarkable and really inspiring. I think the closest I can come to it is looking at places like Syria or Palestine or Iraq or Egypt, countries which have very recently undergone major revolutions in which they did have a lot of all of these places had a lot of support and I should say interest in what was happening from the outside world, but it became apparent after a while because of the unique nature of the Arabic language and the Arabic culture, that their sort of revolutions and their kind of new movements are something which they really have to address themselves. So I think realizing that and looking at how my generation and the generation younger are expressing themselves artistically in the Arab world, in places, as I said, Egypt and Palestine, Syria, Iraq, seeing how they are expressing themselves this way really makes me think of how Japan has really developed its kind of collaborative spirit of stepping into the radical action and making a lot of output and shaping their society based on their kind of dream vision. And I think there's a similar, even though it's there's a major difference in which in the Arab world it's in very early stages, but I think you're seeing that in the Arab world it's very similar. You know, the way young people are coming together and creating new spaces and artistic spaces, social spaces. That's really inspiring, and I can see a lot of what I've experienced over the last 4 years reflected in what I'm seeing here in Japan, I think. So that's been really interesting. It's also really interesting. I mean, that's one major similarity. I mean, there are also differences in it. I mean, there are other kind of superficial differences, like form-based superficial differences in between Japanese society and even Middle Eastern society and of course Western society, in that perhaps this is related to how this naive foreigner perceives this remarkable work ethic here. But it seems also that I'm an Arab, I'm Syrian, and I'm very used to people expressing their emotions abundantly, and for them, even those of us who are more analytically and scientifically inclined to express their emotions very clearly and very clearly. Japan has developed very different ways of expressing emotion. It has a very unique system of politeness degrees. There's different ways of using language and body language based on who you're talking to, which is really interesting because honestly, I don't understand this at all. It's completely new to me. I don't understand how people communicate this way, and I know that I don't do it well at all. So I'm very grateful to my kind Japanese hosts for putting up with, I think they've gotten used to dealing with Westerners coming in, but I believe I'm the first Arab. I mean, it just so happens I can speak English quite well because I was educated in British schools, but in my heart, I'm actually Arabic. And so I really thank them for having to deal with somebody who, it's difficult enough for Japanese people to get used to a British or a Canadian person coming in, but for them to get used to an Arab, I'm the only, I believe I'm probably the only Arab in this entire prefecture. Probably one of the only Arabs outside of Tokyo in this immediate area. So I thank them for their patience. But to go back to my points, people express themselves differently. In Arabs, it's very obvious from their facial expressions and the tone of voice and their gesticulations what they're feeling or what they're going through. It's not so obvious here because people in Japan tend not to speak unless it's absolutely necessary, and I've noticed that they don't really express what they feel very much. In anime they do, in comics they do, in film they do. They pour a lot of their complex emotional development into their media. But perhaps because of that same ethic in terms of collaborative spirit of getting things done, I very rarely see that tendency. I see it amongst teenagers and younger, but after kids hit about 7, because I teach kids from ages toddler 3 to senior citizens, and after about age 17, they start to drop, they start to lose their desire, or they start to lose their tendency, at least on the surface, to express all of their emotions very clearly on their face and through their body language, in a way, at least into body language as a Westerner or an Arab might understand it. It must be very confusing for anyone watching this video because, I'm not I'm not just coming to Japan from the West. I'm coming to Japan from having grown up in different places. So, I'm a walking contradiction in myself. So just imagine how I perceive all of this. So it's very interesting in that way. I mean, people don't express emotions here in a way which I understand immediately. So it's really taken me some time to really tap into the energy as an empath of what's going on around me. And that can be tough because even doing that sometimes I feel like I've really misinterpreted what people mean, especially my really lovely coworker who I've spent so much time with over this past year. I'm sure there's so many times in which I've misinterpreted his body language or his words or what he's tried to say to me, unless except for those few times he was very clear to me, which I'm very thankful for that. But it's very it's been a big challenge for me in that respect because I've realized that it's really taken me out of my comfort zone in a good way, because I've become very used to, I think, taking for granted that I can always tap into what other people are thinking. And I think I've been playing on easy mode, being as I am an Arab, and that's very easy to know what people are thinking. People generally, culturally, don't tend to hide their emotions very well, and the West, the West, the British people are a bit more culturally reserved, but Britain is very complex because anyway it's so mixed ethnically now that's changing a lot. But Japan's very different because it doesn't have, it's been very isolated from the world, so it's developed a very unique set of cultural and linguistic dynamics which haven't really until very recently have not really been impacted by foreign influences a lot, and you can really see that. That's another thing. I'm a vegan, so that's been interesting. Everywhere I go as a vegan, it's an interesting challenge. But I'm not just a vegan. I'm primarily a raw. I'm primarily a raw living. I live a primarily raw living lifestyle. So finding food to eat because I eat raw has been very easy. That's not been difficult at all. What has been more difficult is undergoing challenges here, and then and then in Dubai or the UK, USA, you have kind of these fallbacks like date snacks and vegan biscuits that you fall back on like when going gets tough. Here I've really learned to buckle down because apart from fruits and veggies, now you can't be sure that anything else you buy is really vegan if you can't read kanji on food labels. And there is some really, if you're a vegan and you come here and you're not doing it for health reasons, like I found I mean, I became a vegan and a raw vegan for primarily health reasons and also ethical reasons. But almost all the vegans that I've read about who live in Japan are not interested in health at all. They just they basically continue eating meat-like things, but they only changed their diet kind of for political reasons or for ethical reasons solely. So that's been really interesting. A lot of these people have taken the time to really pick out vegan versions of meat and vegan versions of biscuits and chocolates and sweets and things, vegan and things which I, as somebody who eats mono meals and salads, does not really into. But nevertheless, when things get tough, you emotionally, food tends to be a good outlet for that. So in those moments in which I would come home really tired and hungry and I wanted something more than a salad, I would find myself very frustrated and like looking at different rice balls and things. Even I've only had like even though Japanese eat so much rice and vegans also eat so much rice, I've only had rice maybe no more than 7 or 8 times in 11 months, if that. But those 7 or 8 times I ate rice balls, I was in an emotionally bad state because I know that rice, I know that any sort of, as a raw vegan, I know that any kind of cooked rice isn't good for you because of the sticky glutinous nature of the grains. You're much better off eating something like sprouted quinoa or sprouted buckwheat, or even cooked quinoa is slightly better, but I think sprouted is the best if you feel like you're missing some of that, some of the amino acids from a grain as you transition. But really, I think the more you go on the health raw vegan journey, the more you realize you don't need protein, you don't need to think about calories so much. You can just you can just go by your body's intuition. You can go by what your biology needs in terms of fresh fruits and vegetables, high water in the summer and the hot spring, and then going a bit incorporating more fats and nuts and seeds in the winter. When you start to become spiritually conscious and health conscious and food conscious, you start to realize that what you need to eat is more kind of basic. But then, even though it might be basic on a biological level, growing up in a society, in a culture that bombards you with all kinds of messages with regards to food and lifestyle, that can be challenging to kind of stay true to yourself in a crazy world. So that's been tough for me here because in Japan there's a lot of consciousness of food as art form in terms of presentation of food, in terms of there is a kind of health consciousness here, but it's very interesting. It's like, at least based on how I see it, it's like health as art form, like it's like, for example, if they want to produce a health pamphlet, there'll be very detailed instructions about what you need to eat and drink, along with really cute and gorgeous and inspiring cartoon animations and things. There'll be like groups and get-togethers and meetups and themes kind of organized around healthy eating. There's a thing here in Japan called macrobiotic, and even in English I don't even know what that is, but it seems to be a thing here in terms of eating healthy. But at least based on what I know to be true about the fundamental principles of human health, I think it's quite superficial. But that's nothing. That's no criticism of Japan. Everywhere you go, every country's cuisine, Italian, French, Arabic cuisine, Western cuisine, Greek cuisine, there tends not to be a very big focus on healthy eating. It's more like what have we grown up eating, what makes us feel good, comfort foods. Every single country's cuisine has a comfort food uh, dimension to it in terms of food which tastes good in the moment, but when you eat it with friends and family, they make you feel like crap later because it's either too heavy or too fatty or too processed or has too much meat or cheese. I think Japan is not immune from that at all. But it makes it, there's an even added layer of difficulty in Japan because even though they do eat, they may eat less red meat than those in the West. They eat more fish, and also there's zero concept of vegetarianism or animal welfare here. Everything, even vegetables, are cooked in something called the dashi stock, which dashi stock is cooked with it's a cooking stock made from dried bonito fish flakes, which is a skin of fish dried, steam dried, and then boiled into stock. And that's everywhere. So if you want to eat something cooked vegan in Japan, you really have to look around, and it becomes in Tokyo. I suppose if you live in Tokyo, it's rather easy. But if you live outside of Tokyo in one of the more rural suburban areas, and you don't yet have that raw, that consciousness that your diet should be predominantly raw, then that can be a bit challenging for you, I think. And as somebody who is still on their journey to being 100% raw, I've definitely encountered some challenges there. Nothing that I couldn't handle, but there have been sizable challenges too, and they have kept me up at night. So at certain times, there's just so much to say. 11 months of recapping. It's been half an hour. So what I think I'll do is, because I think half an hour is a pretty good time, is I will stop this video and I think I'll do another one giving some more final impressions within the next week or so, because I think that, and so I can bring the Japan Wild Rocket series to a bit of a close, and then I can and then of course once I leave Japan, I can speak about it from more of a distant point of view after arriving back in the UK again, after visiting Dubai again, and wherever else I may end up. So this has been a very interesting and fun video that has really been fun to talk about. Wild Rocket here in Japan, recapping almost a year of living in this beautiful, fascinating and wonderful culture with some of the most kindest and sweetest people you'll ever meet. Until the next video, this has been Wild Rocket with you with another Japan series. Take care and God bless you. Peace.